Imagine this. You're an American soldier in World War II, but your parents were German killed for opposing Hitler's Nazi regime. Now you're fighting the very regime that murdered your blood. Every day, you're dodging bullets, burying your friends, and holding on to letters from the woman you love, until one day, even her voice is gone. This isn't just a war story. This is your story. It's about love lost in smoke, friendship built in foxholes, and one little girl who reminds you that, even in hell, hope survives. Welcome to Letters from the Front. This is your journey. Now, let's start. You were 10 when the knock came. It was a Sunday, late morning. Your mother was flipping pancakes in the kitchen, humming some old German lullaby under her breath. The smell of butter and syrup filled the apartment. You still remember how warm it was, how safe it felt. Then the knock. 3 heavy pounds on the door, firm, measured, like someone rehearsed them. Your mother froze mid-flip, the pancakes slapping awkwardly back onto the pan. Your father stood from the table slowly, calmly, too calmly. His eyes didn't leave hers. You didn't understand then, but they did. You opened the door before either of them could stop you. 2 men in black coats, no uniforms, no smiles. One of them had eyes like cracked ice and a German accent that made your stomach twist before you even knew why. "Mr. and Mrs. Keller," he said. "It's time." You didn't know what that meant, but your parents did. Your mother placed the spatula down and smoothed your hair with a shaking hand. "We talked about this," she whispered to your father. Your father just nodded, lips tight. They didn't run, didn't scream, didn't beg. They kissed your forehead, both of them, like it was just another school day. Then they turned and followed the men out the door. You never saw them again. The neighbors didn't say anything. Not then, not after. No one brought it up. It was as if your parents never existed. And you, a boy with German blood in 1937 Brooklyn, were suddenly very alone. The pancakes burned on the stove. That smell stayed in your nose for years. Time passed. Years folded into themselves like dying flowers. You were shuffled between a Catholic orphanage and distant relatives who offered you food, but never love. They never asked about your parents. You stopped talking about them. The last name Keller stuck to your skin like a label. Or a warning. Kids threw it at you like a stone. Teachers hesitated when they said it out loud. You learned quickly. Keep your head down. Speak little, trust less. By 17, you were working nights on the dock's calloused hands, aching back, lungs full of salt and smoke. You'd grown tall, quiet, watchful. You listened more than you spoke. And when you did speak, people tended to lean in. Sometimes you wondered what your parents had really done. You weren't told the full story. But you remembered whispers, crumpled flyers stuffed in coat pockets, your father disappearing at night with envelopes, your mother arguing in German with a man you never saw again. You heard the word resistance once, murmured in the orphanage by a nun who crossed herself after saying it. And in that same drawer where your father once kept his shaving kit, you found the small notebook he'd left behind. Thin, cracked leather, pages full of German phrases, scribbled poetry, old prayers. It didn't tell you much, but it was all you had. That and your mother's wedding ring tied on a leather cord you wore under your shirt like a secret. March 3rd, 1943. You came home from the docks to find the letter, folded crisp, wedged under your apartment door. The envelope was government beige. The seal made your throat dry. Greetings. You are hereby ordered for induction into the Armed Forces of the United States. You read it twice before your legs gave out beneath you. Your parents had been taken by men who followed orders. Now you were being given one. You could have burned the letter. You could have run, but you didn't. You never even thought about it. You packed what little you had: the notebook, the ring, a photo of your parents from before the world turned on them, and left the apartment in the dark, locking the door behind you like it still mattered. There was no one to say goodbye to, no one to write. You lit a cigarette and walked to the train station. The snow had started to fall. The induction center was nothing special. Gray walls, shouting sergeants. A sea of shaved heads and bad coffee. You were processed, poked, and handed a uniform that didn't quite fit. You met Tommy there, a loud kid from Boston, who talked like he was invincible and punched like he had something to prove. He took to you fast. Said you looked like a guy who's been through some shit. You shrugged and offered him a cigarette. It sealed it. Then came Javier, quiet, calm, from Texas. Or maybe Arizona. He didn't talk much about home. He prayed every night before bed and took care of his rifle like it was a newborn. And Lewis was the one with the soft eyes and the photo he kept folded in his chest pocket. Annie, his girl back in Vermont. "We're going to have a White House with blue shutters," he'd say. "I'm going to teach her how to shoot squirrels off the back porch." You didn't tell them about your past, not at first. Not about the men in coats, not about the notebook, not about how you woke up some nights clutching the ring so tight it left a mark on your chest. They had their stories. You had yours. But something about being screamed at by the same sergeant, crawling through the same mud, freezing under the same sky, it breaks you together, binds you, and slowly you began to trust them. Not with your full truth, but enough to sit at a campfire one night, under stars that didn't care who lived or died, and say softly, "My parents were German." Tommy didn't even blink, just handed you the last bite of his chocolate bar and said, "So were mine." Weeks passed, drills, weapons training, more shouting, marching, shooting, more marching. One night, you sat awake while the others slept, your father's notebook open in your lap. You traced the words with your fingers, not really reading them, just feeling them. Like maybe if you touched them enough, you'd remember his voice. You wrote something at the bottom of the last page. "I don't know what I'm fighting for, but I know what I'm fighting against." And when you closed the book, you knew. You weren't just going to war. You were going back to the country that murdered your parents. You were going back with a gun in your hands. April came fast, faster than you wanted. And one cold night, sitting in the mess hall with a tray of gray meat and a biscuit harder than your boots, an officer barked out a list of names. Yours was first. You'd been chosen. Transport in 2 days. Destination: Europe. The war was waiting, and so was your past. The train rolled into the camp just after midnight. It was cold, bone-deep kind of cold. Not the winter kind. The kind that settles into your soul and never leaves. The kind that tells you you're far from home. Camp Kilmer, New Jersey. Just a holding station. A place to fatten you up before tossing you into the meat grinder. The Army didn't say that, of course. But the guys who'd been around longer, they knew. You could see it in their eyes. The barracks smelled like wet wood, gun oil, and 20 different brands of sweat. Someone snored like they were dying in slow motion. Someone else cried, quietly. Under their blanket, you pretended not to hear. Tommy was the first to break the silence. "Well," he said, dropping his duffel on a cot, "this is cozy." You cracked half a smile and threw your pack down next to his. Javier didn't say much. He just sat down, took off his boots, and rubbed. His rosary between his fingers, like it was the only thing tethering him to this world. Lewis pulled out the photo of his fiancée again. Her name was Annie. You knew that by now. Knew she liked jazz and couldn't bake to save her life. He'd told you everything. You wondered if he told her anything about you. 3 days passed. Routine became the drug. Wake up, eat, drill, wait. Wait some more, sleep, repeat. But nobody was sleeping much, because the letters had started to arrive. Orders one by one. Names were called out in the mess hall, like death sentences. The officers didn't say where you were going, just handed over a sealed envelope and nodded like they understood, like they'd seen it all before. Then came your name, Keller Michael. You stood up, back straight, heart hammering so loud you barely heard the sound of your own boots as you walked. The envelope was light, a piece of paper, maybe 2. You opened it back in the barracks. Operation Overlord, Infantry, First Wave, transport departs April 30th. That was it. No fanfare. No detail, no mercy. You sat down on your cot and stared at the words until they blurred. First Wave. Javier didn't even look up from his prayers. Tommy just sighed. Shit, Louis. Louis looked like someone had kicked the air out of his lungs. But none of you said anything else, because what was there to say? You were going to die. You just didn't know, and the days crawled after that. You tried to keep busy rifle drills, equipment checks, practicing with live ammo out on the frozen training fields. But every night, it got harder to fall asleep, harder to shake the dreams of your father, dreams of men in black coats with hollow eyes and blood on their boots, dreams of your mother screaming while you stood at the door, frozen on the morning of April 28th. You woke up early. The sky was pale gray, like an old bruise. You sat outside the barracks, smoking the last of Tommy's cigarettes, while the camp slowly came to life. That's when you saw Elise for the first time. She was walking across the medical tent grounds, carrying a box of bandages, blonde hair tied up tight, boots worn in. She had that same hollow look in her eyes that you saw in the mirror. A nurse. She didn't look at you, not really, just passed by. But something about the way her shoulders slumped, the quiet weight in her step, it stuck with you. She looked like someone who had seen too much. Later that day, you ran into her again, literally. You were rushing around the corner of the barracks when she turned the same corner carrying supplies. The boxes hit the ground with a thud. "Jesus, sorry," you said, stooping down. She gave a tired laugh. "Don't worry. You're not the first soldier to barrel through a corner like you're storming Berlin." You helped her gather the supplies. She noticed your necklace, the ring. "That's beautiful," she said. "Your girl back home?" You looked at her for a long second, then shook your head. "My mother." Her expression changed, softer, sadder. "I'm sorry." You didn't respond. She didn't ask anything else. But something passed between you, something quiet, fragile, like the first light of morning after a nightmare. April 30th arrived like a funeral march. You and the boys were lined up before sunrise. Duffels packed, boots shined, hearts pounding in unison. There were no speeches, no flags waving in the wind. Just the sound of the sergeant barking orders and trucks, rumbling to take you to the coast. Elise found you before you left. "I thought you might want this," she said, handing you a small folded letter. You opened it later, aboard the ship, asterisk. "You don't know me, but I see you. I see the weight you carry. I've seen it before in others. And in myself. If you survive this in God, I hope you do come find me. I'd like to know your story." Elise, asterisk. You didn't know what to feel. The sea stretched out in all directions, like a graveyard waiting to be filled. That night, Tommy puked off the side of the boat. Louis played cards with some guys from Ohio, laughing too loudly, too hard. Like if he laughed long enough, maybe it would carry him back to Vermont. You just stood on the deck, staring at the stars, wondering if your parents were watching, wondering if you were ready to die. On May 5th, the captain announced over the speaker that you were near England. Soon you'd be in staging camps. Soon you'd land in France. Soon you'd see war the way your parents had up close. You still hadn't told anyone about them. Not the full story. Not the executions. Not the resistance flyers. Not the night they disappeared. But the rage was always there, a quiet pulse under your skin. You weren't here for medals or flags. You were here because the man who killed your mother wore a swastika, and anyone was going to pay for that. On the last night aboard the ship, Louis asked what you were fighting for. America? He guessed. Freedom? You stared at the waves. "No," you said. "I'm fighting to make the dead rest easier." He didn't ask anything else after that. He didn't need to. The ship was bigger than anything you'd ever seen. Gray steel. And rust, stretched wide across the docks, like a sleeping giant waiting to wake. When you stepped onto the gangway, duffel bags slung over your shoulder, you felt like you were walking into something ancient, something that didn't care whether you made it out alive. April 30th, 1944. You were officially part of the 29th Infantry Division, shipping out across the Atlantic. Destination: England. Objective: prepare to punch through Fortress Europe and bring down the Reich. You boarded the ship with Tommy, Javier, and Louis at your side. Tommy was talking a mile a minute, trying to drown out the sound of his own heartbeat. God, this thing's a beast. I bet you could fit half of Boston in. Here, you think they've got whiskey on board? Louis gave a half smile and leaned on the railing. You'd drown in the first bottle. Javier didn't say anything. He just stared at the water like it had the answers. You didn't talk much either. Just watched the skyline of New York disappear. Behind you, shrinking into the fog like a ghost, you were leaving home, if you could still call it that. The voyage took 9 days, 9 long, salt-stained, freezing nights. The bunks were crammed. The air always smelled like metal and diesel, and the ocean rocked you until your guts begged for mercy. The food was barely food. You counted more rats than you did officers. But you got used to it. Men adapt fast when they know the alternative is death. The nights were the worst. No light but the flickering red bulbs overhead. No sound but the creak of steel and the occasional whispered prayer. That and the coughing. Always someone coughing. You and the boys slept in the same section below deck. Wedged in like sardines, you'd play cards, trade stories, argue about baseball, or pass the time just listening to the rhythm of the waves. Tommy made jokes about everything. Everything, even death. If I bite it, just bury me with a cigarette and a goddamn coffee. Let's Saint. Peter, know I'm coming in style. Louis laughed, but it was nervous laughter, the kind that cracked if you pressed too hard. One night, he passed you a folded paper. Wrote Annie another letter, he said. Told her I'd be home before Christmas, even if I gotta swim the whole way. You nodded and handed him your pencil. He tucked it behind his ear. Javier read from a small book of Psalms, quiet, calm, centered. He kept a silver cross tucked into his shirt, and sometimes, when he thought no one was watching, he'd hold it and close his eyes just a little longer than usual. You respected that. You envied it. A few days in, you found yourself staring at your reflection in a tin shaving mirror. Not much of a beard, but enough scruff to feel older than you were. You looked tired, hollow-eyed, angry. The ring around your neck burned cold against your skin. You opened your father's notebook again. There was barely room left to write. You scribbled something in the corner. They said I'd be a soldier. They didn't say I'd be a graveyard in boots. On the 7th night, the storm hit. Waves pounded the hull like fists. Men screamed, bunks flew, water sloshed through the corridors. You clutched your pack and prayed the ship wouldn't split in half. Some men were sick for hours. Others cried quietly into their sleeves. A few cracked, but the 4 of you stayed together, shoulder to shoulder, boots planted. After it passed, the deck was slick with rain and puke and silence. You went up top, needed air, needed space. That's when you saw her again, Elise. She was standing at the far end of the deck, arms folded, staring at the Black Sea. Her hair was damp, tied back with a piece of twine. She looked exhausted, like everyone else, but still there was something in the way she held herself, fragile but defiant. You didn't speak, just stood near her, watching the same horizon. Eventually, she said, storms like that, they make you think you're already dead. You didn't disagree. She turned, saw your necklace, and nodded at it. You keep touching that. Is it from someone you lost? You hesitated, then answered, my mother. She waited, didn't ask. More, but that silence said everything. I'm Elise, she said softly. You nodded. Michael. She didn't smile. Not really, but her expression softened. "Take care of yourself, Michael," she said, before walking off into the mist. You watched her go, and for the first time in days, the ocean didn't seem so endless. May 8th, 1944. You reached England, docked at Southampton, boots hitting the wet cobblestone like thunder, rows of officers barking orders, trucks waiting too. Take you to staging camps. The sky was gray and heavy, like the world itself knew what was coming. The English countryside was nothing like Brooklyn. Rolling hills, old stone roads, sheep on the hillsides. You tried to take it in, knowing the next place you went might be full of burning fields and broken bones. The training camps were brutal. Every morning started before dawn. PT, drills, more shooting, more running. You were handed new gear, new maps, new orders. They didn't say D-Day out loud, but you heard it in the whispers. Everyone knew something. Big was coming, and soon the bond between you and the guys got tighter. Tommy and Lewis started calling you Dead Eyes, said you always looked like you were thinking 10 miles ahead. You didn't argue. At night, you'd sit by the campfire and listen to Tommy tell stories about his childhood in South Boston. Or Lewis hum old swing tunes that reminded him of home. Javier usually just sat quiet, eyes reflecting the flames, muttering psalms under his breath. One night, Lewis handed you a folded letter. "Write something down," he said. "Something you want to say if, we don't make it." You hesitated, then took the paper and wrote, "If I die, tell them I came back from my parents." For every scream, the Reich buried. For every silence that followed, Lewis read it, didn't say a word, just folded it and slipped it in his coat. June 2nd, 1944. The final briefing came. Your squad was assigned to land on Omaha Beach. Dog Green Sector, front line, first wave. You could feel it in your bones. This was it. 3 days from now. The sky would fall, and the sea would turn red. No one said anything that night. No jokes, no songs, just quiet packing, shaking hands, and stares that lasted too long. You lay awake in your cot, staring at the ceiling, the ring pressed to your lips. You didn't pray, you just remembered your mother's smile, your father's hand on your shoulder, the sound of a knock, and the hollow space they left behind. June 4th, 1944. The rain started early, thin, cold, biting. You stood in line, duffel over your shoulder, boots sinking into the mud as the last trucks loaded up. No one talked. No jokes this time. No humming from Lewis. No scripture from Javier. Not even a smart-ass comment from Tommy. The silence felt heavier than your rifle. The boats waited just off the shore. Navy men smoking under gray skies. You'd boarded ships before, but this was different. This wasn't training. This was the last stop before hell. Tommy kept rolling a cigarette between his fingers, but never lit it. "I'm gonna light this bastard when we hit the sand," he said. "Light it. Take one drag, and scream my name to the goddamn Nazis." Lewis gave him a shaky grin. You tried to believe him. The Higgins boats were already being loaded. Flat-bottomed, steel gray, built like coffins with motors. You were crammed shoulder to shoulder with 30 other men, the stench of wet canvas and nerves thick in the air. The ramp at the front stayed up, but you could still see the churning. See past it angry, black, endless. You didn't know then what Omaha would be. None of you did. They gave you last-minute briefings, terrain, defenses, what little intel they had. German bunkers, machine gun nests, barbed wire. The beach was codenamed Dog Green, but everyone already had their own name for it. Tommy called it Gods. Ashtray. You couldn't stop fidgeting. Checked your ammo again and again. Read the names carved into the wood wall of the boat from the last guys who used it. One of them just said, "Sorry, Ma." Lewis pulled out Annie's photo and kissed it. Javier touched his cross, eyes closed, lips moving in silence, and you held the ring. The chain had dug a groove into your neck over the months. but it didn't hurt anymore. It was just part of you. You looked out at the sea and whispered, "I'm coming, Mama. I'm coming to finish it." The next morning, June 5th, was chaos, last meals, last ammo checks. A sudden announcement. The invasion was delayed by weather. You would go on the 6th. You heard someone puke. Javier stood quietly by the rails, watching the waves. Tommy was pacing like a caged animal. You and Louis sat on your gear, not saying a word, just existing. That was enough. That night, the chaplain came by, offering prayers and Bibles. You didn't take one, but you listened. When it got dark, Elise showed up. You hadn't seen her in days. She found you alone, sitting behind one of the medical tents. Mud caked your boots. Your hands were shaking, and you didn't even realize it. She sat beside you without saying anything for a while. Then finally, softly, she said, "You look tired." You gave a dry laugh. "I feel like I've aged 20 years since March. I see that a lot. Boys turn into ghosts before the shooting even starts." You didn't look at her, just stared at the dirt. "They're gonna throw us into a meat grinder." "They already have," she said. Silence stretched again. Then she reached into her satchel and pulled out a tiny envelope. "For after," she said. If you're still breathing." You took it. "I'll read it." "I hope you do," she said. Then leaned in and kissed your cheek. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't soft. It was something else, like a brand burned into your skin. A mark, something to come back for. When she stood and walked away, you whispered, "Thank you." She didn't turn around. June 6th, D-Day. You were up before the sun. They called you down to the boats. Gear tight, faces blank. The sky was slate gray. The sea churned like it hated you. You could already hear the rumble of distant ships, hundreds of them. Battleships, destroyers, transports. The horizon was nothing but metal and smoke. In the landing craft, your heart thudded like a drumbeat of death. Tommy looked straight ahead. No jokes. Louis kissed his photo again. Javier pulled you close, muttered something in Spanish, and nodded once. You nodded back. The ramp was still up. You couldn't see the beach yet, but you could hear it. Shells screaming overhead. Explosions, gunfire, screams. Somebody up front started to sob quietly. The lieutenant gave orders in a voice that cracked halfway through. "Keep your heads down, move fast. If you freeze, you die." You couldn't feel your fingers. You couldn't remember your own name. All you knew was that you were about to die. And somehow, that was okay. The ramp dropped. Sunlight exploded in your face. Bullets tore through the surf before your boots even hit the water. Men screamed. Men dropped. The surf turned red almost instantly. You moved without thinking, wading through waist-high. Water, pack dragging you down like chains. The beach was chaos bodies, wire, fire, bunkers screaming death from above. You saw a man's helmet fly off as a bullet ripped through his skull. You saw another man crawling with his guts spilling behind him. Tommy was right next to you, firing, yelling. He turned back to help someone, then he was gone. Just gone. 1 second there. The next, just blood and smoke. You didn't stop? Couldn't. Your legs moved on their own. You dropped behind a metal tank trap, breathing hard, heart punching your ribs. Javier slammed in next to you, firing over the edge, shouting something you couldn't hear. Louis slid in after, wounded, bleeding from his arm, eyes wide, wild. "We have to move." He screamed. You nodded, and you ran hours later. The beach was littered with metal and flesh. Smoke hung in the air like a funeral shroud. You sat behind a cratered dune, ears ringing, face covered in grime and blood. Some of it yours, most of it not. Javier sat beside you, cross dangling from his neck. Louis leaned back, pale, clutching his wound. "Tommy," you whispered. Javier just shook his head. "I saw him," Louis said quietly. He didn't feel it. It was fast." You nodded, then cried. Not loud, not messy. Just tears leaking silently down your face, hot and bitter. I never even said goodbye. None of us did, Javier whispered. None of us ever get to. That night, under the shattered French sky, you pulled out Elise's letter. You opened it with trembling hands. Michael, if you're reading this, you survived something unthinkable. Don't let that survival be the only thing you carry forward. Remember who you were before. Remember your reason. Don't let the war turn you into ash, Elise. You folded the letter carefully and tucked it into your pocket, next to the notebook and the ring. You didn't feel alive, but you weren't dead, not yet, and tomorrow you'd have to keep walking. June 7th, 1944. You woke up in a foxhole filled with mud, ash, and silence. Your uniform was soaked through, blood stiffened the sleeves. Your rifle was still clutched in your hands. You couldn't remember falling asleep. Only that at some point, the gun became heavier than your own body, and everything went dark. Louis lay beside you, his arm bandaged in white that had already turned pink. Javier sat nearby, sharpening a knife with mechanical calm, his hands moving without thought, like he wasn't even in his body anymore. You didn't speak. None of you did. Not yet. Across the ruined beach, the smell of cordite still hung thick. Smoke drifted like ghosts through the dunes. The ocean had washed away some of the blood, but not all of it. That kind of stain doesn't vanish in a day. The bodies hadn't all been moved yet. Some still floated. You saw what was left of Tommy, half buried under a collapsed wall, his helmet cracked like an egg, his cigarette still behind his ear. He never got to light it. You walked over in silence and pulled the smoke from his hair, tucking it into your own breast pocket. You didn't say anything. Words were useless now. That afternoon, you moved inland. The hedgerows of Normandy were thick and twisted, like the land itself was trying to trap you. The Germans knew this terrain. You didn't. Every step felt like a coin flipped between life and death. You kept your head low, rifle up, eyes scanning. Hours passed in a haze of crawling, whispering, hand signals. Your nerves screamed constantly, ready to snap at every rustle, every shadow, every gust of wind. At one point, a boy popped out of the brush, couldn't have been more than 12, barefoot, filthy, waving a white cloth. He was shouting in French. You couldn't understand him. A sergeant screamed at you to hold fire. Someone behind you didn't hear in time. The shot rang out. The boy dropped. No one said a thing. You kept moving. By nightfall, you'd secured a ruined farmhouse just outside a village with a name you couldn't pronounce. Half the buildings were rubble. The air smelled like burnt hay and something worse, that metallic stench of blood and iron and bodies. It didn't get to rot properly. That's where you met Captain Hargrove. He was a Texan with a voice like gravel and the eyes of a man who hadn't slept in a week. He took one look at your squad, or what was left of it, and handed out orders like a preacher handing out judgment. Dig in. We expect a counterattack before dawn. I want a foxhole every 10 feet and a gun pointed at every door. You dug. You didn't talk, just shovel, breathe, repeat. When you were done, you sat in your hole, hands blistered, chest hollow. Louis passed you a piece of stale chocolate. I keep thinking I'll wake up in Vermont, he muttered, that this is just some long-ass nightmare. You bit down, even though you weren't hungry. Do you think they saw us? He asked. You turned to him. Who? Tommy. All the guys, the ones we lost. You think they're watching us? You didn't answer because you didn't know, but you wanted to believe it. Later that night, you took first watch. The moon hung low, yellow and thin, like a dying eye. You sat with your rifle across your lap, staring into the dark, every leaf. A potential death. Javier came to relieve you after an hour. You should sleep, he said. You nodded, but didn't move. He sat beside you. Neither of you said a word for a while. Finally, he broke the silence. You still carry that notebook? You glanced at him. Yeah? Your father's? Yeah, he nodded. He teach you how to write? No, you said. But he taught me how not to lie. You pulled it out and flipped to a fresh page, and you wrote, "There is no glory. Here, only fire and dirt, and names I'll never forget. Tommy, Peter, Raymond, the boy in the hedgerow. God forgive me, but I remember them better now that they're gone." Javier looked at your handwriting and smiled faintly. You write like? A man who wants to be remembered. You shrugged. I write like a man who knows he might not be. A couple hours later, you heard music soft, barely there, coming from what was left of a farmhouse next to your post. You followed it. Inside, you found a French girl no older than 16, sitting by a broken piano. Half the keys were missing, and her hands trembled as she played. She didn't look up, just kept playing. A haunting little melody. Something sad, something beautiful. You sat against the wall and listened. When she finally stopped, she turned her head and said in broken English, "My father. He played this. When my mother died," you nodded slowly. "I lost mine too," you said. She gave you a strange look. "Then maybe you should learn this song." You didn't ask for her name. She didn't ask for yours. Some moments are too fragile for introductions. Back in your foxhole, you stared at the sky for a long time. You thought about Elise, about Tommy, about your mother, and the weight of all of it settled across your chest like armor made from memory. You whispered one word, tomorrow. Then you closed your eyes and waited for the next sunrise. June 8th, 1944. You moved out before dawn. Your boots crushed, dew-drenched. Grass as the fog crawled low over the fields like a warning. The hedgerows were tighter here, knotted with brambles. Stone and secrets. Each step forward felt like dragging your soul across broken glass. Your squad had shrunk. What started as 15 men was now 8. You stopped counting the dead. The new replacements hadn't said much. Kids, one of them Riley, from Oklahoma, couldn't have been more than 17. His rifle was too big for his frame. He looked like he should have been in a classroom. Not. Crawling through mud, he stuck to you like a shadow. Is it true? He asked once that the Germans shoot medics first. You didn't answer. There was no comfort here. No time for mercy. Only movement by midday. You'd reached the outskirts of Colville-sur-Mer. The town was barely a town now, just shattered buildings and empty windows that watched you pass like hollow. Eyes, the air carried the echo of past shelling, distant gunfire, and the smell of something burning. Always burning, your orders were clear. Clear the houses, secure the crossroads. Hold the position until reinforced. Sounds simple when typed on a piece of paper, but paper doesn't bleed. The first house was empty. So was the second. Then came the ad. Third, you and Lewis kicked the door in. The moment you stepped inside, you knew. A flicker of movement, the click of a safety. Gunfire erupted, close, deafening. You dropped low, firing instinctively. Lewis screamed and hit the floor. You rolled behind. An overturned table, heart pounding, wood splinters flying around you like bees. Javier burst through the side door, took out the machine gun nest in 2 clean shots. The silence after was worse than the chaos. You crawled to Lewis. His leg was torn open, blood pooling fast. His hands were shaking. Am I gonna? You're fine, you lied. Just a scratch. But your voice cracked. Riley came in behind you, white as chalk. You shouted for morphine. He just stared. You grabbed Lewis's hand. Stay with me. Come on, man. We got a porch waiting in Vermont. Remember? His lips moved, but no sound came out. You saw the light dim in his eyes even before his grip loosened. Just like that, another brother gone. Another name carved into the walls of your mind. You carried. Lewis outside laid him in the grass like he was sleeping. Javier crossed himself. Riley tried to say something but threw up instead. No one judged him. That night, You sat beside Louis's body and opened his coat. You pulled out the photo of Annie. She was smiling. Sunlight on her face, wind in her hair. You couldn't stop looking at it. "I'll get it to her," you said. Barely audible. "I'll make sure she knows." Then you folded the photo carefully and slid it into your pocket. Next to Elise's letter and the ring, your heart felt like stone, but your hands? They were shaking. The next morning, artillery shelled the far ridge. You pushed forward anyway. Each step was worse than the last. The land swallowed you whole. Bullets screamed. Grenades turned men into pieces. You moved like a machine fire. Reload, duck, run, by now. Killing didn't feel like murder. It just felt like breathing. On June 10th, you reached a church. Stone walls, broken stained glass, charred pews. What once held faith now held fire. You cleared it fast, found bodies inside both German and American. A chaplain had been shot near the altar. Blood pooled beneath the crucifix. Javier stood there a long time, staring up at it. You left him alone. Outside, Riley sat with his back to the church wall. Eyes red. I saw one of them up close. He muttered. He was my age, maybe younger. Didn't even aim, just froze. I shot him anyway. You sat beside him. He looked at you, searching for something. Permission, forgiveness. You couldn't give either. Some things, you said, we never come back from. He nodded slowly. I'm scared I'll forget who I was. You wanted to tell him you wouldn't. That deep down, you'd always stay the same kid who used to dream of baseball and first kisses and summer air. But you knew better, because every time you looked in a mirror, you saw less of that boy and more of the soldier, more of the killer. That night, Elise's letter came out again. You read it like scripture, not because it fixed anything, but because it reminded you that someone still saw the human beneath the mud and blood. You traced her handwriting with your thumb, memorizing it. She'd written, "Don't let this war turn you to ash." Too late, but part of you still fought. To keep a spark alive, even if it burned your fingers. On June 12th, Captain Hargrove was killed by a sniper. You watched it happen. 1 second. He was ordering artillery coordinates near a bombed-out barn. The next, he was falling backward, blood blooming from his temple like a flower. The men scattered, screamed. You grabbed the field phone and dragged it back behind cover. Your hands were drenched in blood, in mud. You couldn't tell which anymore. Javier helped you carry the body. No one cried. There wasn't time. There never was. That night, as rain poured over the countryside, you finally cracked. Alone under a ruined tree, you screamed. Screamed until your throat tore raw. Until the trees screamed back. Until the war screamed. With you, then you collapsed, shaking, sobbing, the rain washing your face like some cruel baptism. And through it all, you whispered, "I'm sorry. Tommy, I'm sorry. Louis, Mama." I'm trying. June 15th, 1944. The rain hadn't stopped in 2 days. It fell steady, cold, relentless, like God himself was trying to wash France clean, but couldn't quite get the blood out. You were soaked to the bone, hunched under the wreckage of a collapsed barn, waiting for orders that never came. Your boots squished with every step. Your hands were cracked. Your eyes stung from the smoke of the last village you cleared. You were still bleeding inside from losing Louis, but there was no time to mourn, no time to breathe. The war didn't care. It kept moving, dragging you with it like a current too strong to swim against. Riley stayed close now, like a little brother who'd seen too much. Too fast. You didn't push him away. Maybe he reminded you of what you used to be. Maybe you just couldn't bear to lose anyone else. Javier had gone quiet again, not just silent, but hollow. He barely spoke, just cleaned his rifle, murmured prayers, and stared into the dark like he was expecting something to come for him soon. Maybe it was. Maybe it was coming for all of you. That night, You sat by a fire made from broken furniture and wet wood. Elise's letter was in your lap. You read it again, every word etched into your memory now. But still, you needed it. Like a wounded man needs morphine. Like a drowning man needs anything to cling to. Don't let the war turn you to ash. But you were ash now, just barely holding shape. You tried writing her back. Just a few lines. Nothing poetic. I'm still alive. That counts for something, doesn't it? I saw a church burn today. I don't know if God watches this war, but I hope you do. Because if someone doesn't see me, I don't know if I still exist. You folded the page, knowing you might never send it. But writing it helped, just enough. Few days later, something strange happened. You were marching through a battered French village, past fields scorched by tanks and trees stripped bare by shells. Then, out of nowhere, a civilian approached your squad. An old woman, hair gray as snow, walking with a limp. She said something in French you didn't understand. Then she handed you a letter. Your name was scrawled across the front. Pour l'Américain, oh you tristes, she said. For the American with the sad eyes. You stared, stunned. She smiled, nodded once, then disappeared behind a ruined house. Envelope was water-stained, smudged, barely holding together. But you knew the handwriting, Elise. You tore it open like a starving man opening bread. Inside, I heard you landed. I've been treating the wounded coming back from Normandy. They don't talk much, but their eyes tell stories I'm not strong enough to hear. I keep wondering if you're still breathing, if you still carry the ring, if the boy I met on that ship hasn't been buried by the soldier you've become. If you find this, know this. I still remember your voice. I still believe in the boy who writes when no one's watching. You are not lost, not to me. You read it 3 times, then folded it and pressed it to your chest. And for the first time in weeks, you smiled. Barely, but it was there. A flicker, a pulse. You wrote back the next day. Didn't care if it reached her or not. You just needed to say it. Elise, don't know what I am anymore? A man? A ghost? A weapon? But I still carry the ring. And when I feel like I'm disappearing into this war, I think of you, of that one night on the ship when we didn't need words. That memory is a thread. I'm holding on to it. And if I come out of this alive, I'll follow that thread until it leads me home. June 18th, 1944. You were ordered to take Hill 317. They said it was strategic, vital, high ground with artillery placements. You were told it had to be taken by morning. What they didn't say was that the hill was crawling with German paratroopers. You went up in the dark, crawling through mud and barbed wire, explosions flashing like lightning, men screaming around you, bullets dancing inches from your head. You lost Riley on the slope. He was right behind you, whispering something about his mom's blueberry pie, that a mortar shell took him. One moment, you were reaching back to pull him up. The next, there was no hand to pull, just dirt and fire and the smell of roasted skin. You threw up, then you kept climbing. You reached the top at sunrise. Only 3 of your squad made it. You were covered in blood and mud, one ear ringing so loud you could barely think. Your rifle was empty, your hands numb. You looked around and saw nothing but corpses and craters, and then quiet, the kind of silence that isn't peaceful, but stunned, like even the sky couldn't believe what it was looking at. You dropped to your knees and wept, not loud, not broken, just quiet, endless tears. Tears for Riley, for Lewis, for Tommy, for the boy you used to be, and maybe, just maybe, for the man you still hope to be. That night, under a thin blanket and a starless sky, you opened Elise's letter again. You read the line over and over. You are not lost, not to me. And somewhere deep inside the ruins of your chest, something glowed, not a fire, just an ember. But it was still burning. June 21st, 1944. You'd been in France for 15 days. That was all 15 days. It felt like a century. Your hair had started to curl from the grime. Your uniform was stiff, faded, stinking of death and sweat and smoke. Your rifle felt like it had fused to your hands. You hadn't laughed since Tommy died. You hadn't slept without waking up screaming since Riley. The war was inside you now, tucked behind your ribs, stitched into your spine. You walked with it, ate with it, breathed it in every time you opened your mouth. And you hated that you were getting good at it. Your new orders came at sunrise. Clear a cherry orchard northeast of St. Lai. Enemy infantry had dug in between the trees. Spotters said the place was crawling snipers, machine gunners, maybe even a tank. The orchard stretched nearly a mile, tangled and gnarled, with fruit still clinging to the branches, like red coins. They said it would be quick. You already knew they were lying. You advanced in a staggered line, 10 of you, crawling low, moving from tree to tree. The ground was soft, damp. Cherry blossoms floated in the breeze, like pieces of something too innocent for this world. Then the shooting started. A crack, then another. Javier went down, first hit in the side. He dropped fast, but not dead. You dragged him behind a tree, while bullets tore through bark inches from your head. "Don't move," you whispered, pressing a rag to the wound. He just nodded, teeth clenched. You tossed a grenade toward the next row and crawled forward, heart pounding. The orchard turned into a graveyard. One by one, the trees lit up flames, curling around the trunks, black smoke pouring upward as more grenades landed, and someone set fire to the underbrush. Cherries exploded off the branches, the air thick with smoke and sugar. The firestorm blurred everything. You lost your sense of direction. The only thing that kept you moving was instinct and rage. You saw one of the Germans, a kid, no older than Riley, emerge through the smoke. Rifle shaking, he saw you, froze you. Could have let him drop it, could have shouted, but you didn't. You fired once, center mass. He dropped like a puppet with cut strings. You stood over him for a moment, panting. His helmet rolled off. He had freckles and a photograph in his pocket. A girl, blonde, smiling, holding a puppy. You felt your stomach twist. Then you heard gunfire behind you and had to keep moving. By midday, the orchard was secured. Javier had survived, but he was different. Now his eyes sunken, his voice barely a whisper. You helped him limp back to camp, and for a long time, neither of you spoke later. While cleaning your gear, you found cherry juice and blood mixed across your jacket. You couldn't tell which was which. You didn't care anymore. That night, you wrote Elise again. "We cleared a cherry orchard today. I killed a boy with freckles and a love letter in his pocket. I want to say I hesitated. I want to say I wrestled with it. But I didn't. I just pulled the trigger. You once told me not to turn to ash. I'm trying. But today, I think I caught fire." You folded the letter and tucked it between the pages of your father's notebook. Then, for the first time in weeks, you opened that notebook to read, not write. You ran your fingers across his handwriting. You imagined his voice, and you imagined what he would say if he saw you now. Would he still be proud? A few hours before dawn, a medic came to find you. "Soldier," he said, "you got something from headquarters." You blinked. No one got mail out here. He handed you a small, wrinkled envelope. No return address, just your name, your real name, Michael. Keller, you opened it slowly inside. "I saw one of your letters, Elise showed me. I just wanted to say your father would have understood. You don't have to forgive yourself yet, but you do have to come home. We're waiting. Sister Marianne." The name hit you like a punch. She'd run the orphanage. She used to sneak you extra food. She was the only one who ever said your name with kindness after your parents disappeared. Your hands trembled as you folded the letter. And suddenly, the weight of the world felt just a little lighter, not gone, just carried, if only for a second, by someone else. The next morning, Javier asked to see your father's notebook. You handed it to him. He read it slowly, reverently, then he said, "You're not fighting just for yourself, Hermano." You nodded, and together you prepared to move again. Another village, another map, another impossible order. But something had changed. Not the war, not the dirt, not the fear. You were still burning, but you hadn't turned to ash, not yet. June 25th, 1944. The morning began with static radio calls spitting out coordinates, crackling voices layered with urgency. You were already awake before the sergeant barked orders. Another village to take. Another blot on the map full of bullet holes and half-written names. You slung your gear over your back, boots squelching through the mud. Javier moved slower now, the wound still fresh in his side, but he insisted on coming. You didn't argue. You both knew too well that staying behind was its own kind of death. The village was called WWII, or something like it. No one in the squad cared enough to get the name right anymore. They just called it the next one, on the way there. You passed a field scattered with broken wagons, abandoned bicycles, and one piano missing every key, except 3. The air smelled like cow dung, gunpowder, and lilacs. You kept your eyes ahead, kept your mind blank, until Lewis's photograph slipped out of your coat. You stopped and picked it up from the dirt, wiping away a streak of mud with your sleeve. Annie's smile was still there, unbroken, a strand of hair tucked behind her ear. You remembered how Lewis used to talk about her, how he swore she'd name their first kid Henry. You stared at the picture for a long time, then tucked it back in. WWII wasn't empty. You knew the moment you reached the first building a bakery, bombed to rubble when a shot rang out from the church tower. The bullet missed you by inches, punching a hole through your canteen. Water poured down your side like a wound sniper. Someone screamed. You dove behind a wall, heart pounding, rifle shaking in your hands. A kid from a different platoon morales wasn't so lucky. Took it straight to the throat. His body flopped into the street, twitching like a puppet. Blood spread. In a fan under him, soaking the cobblestones, you covered your head, yelling for smoke. Seconds later, white fog swallowed the street. You sprinted across, ducked into an alley, and climbed the steps of a ruined cafe. Javier followed, gritting his teeth, dragging his injured leg. At the top, you peeked through. The broken shutters, the sniper was still there in the bell tower. Mid-reload, calm as death, you raised your rifle, held your breath, fired. The figure dropped silence. It didn't feel like a victory. Just another breath you were allowed to take. Once. The town was secured. You helped clear bodies. Most were young. Some were German. Some were French. Some hard to tell. One of them, curled against the base of a fountain, had a photograph clenched in his hand. You pried it loose gently, feeling like a thief. A woman and child, smiling, standing by a riverbank. The man had died staring at it. You put the photo back in his hand and crossed yourself. It didn't matter what side he was on. In the end, you were all just names waiting to be erased. That night, Elise's letter came out again. You read it by candlelight, lips moving silently over every line. You are not lost, not to me. You wanted to believe that, so you started a new letter. Elise today, I killed another sniper. He was clean, calm, precise. I wonder who he was before this. Maybe he was kind. Maybe he liked books. Maybe he had a sister who braided his hair when he was little. I don't know anymore how to tell who the enemy really is. I'm scared I'll forget your face next. If I do, forgive me. You stopped writing. There, not because you were done, but because you were afraid of what the next sentence might be. Javier joined you by the candle. Want to see something strange? He asked. You nodded. He pulled out a photograph from his breast pocket. It was creased and water-stained. His family, 4 brothers, 2 sisters. A mother with hands like tree roots. A father with a proud scowl. They stood in front of a small adobe house in Arizona. They don't even know I'm alive, he said. You handed him Elise's letter. He read it slowly, then handed it back. Hold on to her, he said. Even if she's not holding on to you. You nodded, and for once, the silence between you wasn't heavy. It just was. The next day, the airstrike came without warning. You were resting in the schoolhouse. Half the platoon had taken off their boots. Someone was eating a can of peaches. Someone else was playing cards. Then the sky screamed. The first bomb hit. 3 buildings away. The second hit the schoolhouse directly. You were thrown across the room. Your ears rang. Your chest burned. The world spun. When you crawled out from the rubble, blood dripping from your temple, the peaches were everywhere. So was flesh. Javier was buried under a beam. You dug with bare hands. You dug like a madman. You didn't stop until you reached his face. He was still breathing, barely. Mi madre. He whispered. Hold on, you said. Stay with me. He looked at you through half-lidded eyes and whispered something you'd never forget. We don't die. We just go quiet. Then he went quiet and didn't wake up that night. You found his photo in his pocket, a family, smiling. You held it like a treasure, like a dying language. You didn't cry. You just stared up at the sky, ashes on your cheeks, and whispered his name until your voice cracked. You buried him behind the schoolhouse, marked it with a boot heel and a cross made from snapped rifle parts, then sat down beside him and wrote, Javier died today. He told me we don't die. We just go quiet, but he was wrong. I am still alive, and I have never felt more dead. June 29th, 1944. A week past the orchard. 3 days after Javier, you were sent north deeper into the French countryside. Fields full of ghosts, roads full of wreckage, and skies that never stopped humming with the promise of thunder. Only now, you weren't with a full platoon. You'd been handpicked for something else, recon. A 4-man squad, no radios, no backup. Just orders to sneak behind enemy lines, observe troop movements near a supply depot, then get out before anyone noticed you were ever there. It felt like suicide dressed up as strategy, but you said yes anyway. Maybe because you didn't care, maybe because you did. Your new squad was strangers. There was Mason, the sergeant, lean, cold-eyed, with a scar across his chin that looked like a failed escape route. Burke, from Minnesota, young, nervous, fumbled his ammo when he was stressed. And Kapinski, a brute, from Detroit who never blinked. He carried a folding knife and sharpened it every night, like he was waiting for a reason to use it. You didn't talk much, just nodded when spoken to. You weren't there to make friends anymore. You had ghosts. Already, that night, you crossed into enemy territory. The air was thick with fog. The trees gnarled and twisted like arthritic fingers. You moved slow, every breath measured, every footfall soft. Your boots barely disturbed the mud. Ahead of you, in the dark, German occupied. Roads, sniper nests, barbed wire, and death that didn't need a name. Mason raised a fist, signaling a stop. You hit the ground and crawled to a small ridge. Below, just beyond the brush, was the depot. It wasn't what you expected. A farmhouse, a barn, a stable full of stacked crates and ammunition belts. German soldiers moved through it calmly, smoking, laughing, unloading a truck. One of them leaned against the fence, looking up at the stars. He looked like he could have been your cousin, or Louis, or you, if you'd been born in the wrong country. You watched, you memorized the patterns. Then you started to move back, but you didn't make it far. Burke stepped on a mine, not a big one, not a screaming, limb-ripping cinematic explosion. Just a click, then a snap, then silence, and Burke on the ground, his foot a mess of shredded leather, meat, and panic. He bit his sleeve to keep from screaming. Mason dropped beside him. We leave him, Krupinski said immediately. Mason shook his head. He's alive. He's a liability, we're not animals, Mason said. You watched them argue, heart hammering. Then you knelt beside Burke and took his hand. His eyes were wide, blood on his teeth. Please, he whispered. We've got you. You said you weren't sure if it was true, but you weren't going to let another kid die alone in a forest. You carried him. Half the night, back through the trees, Karpinski cursed the whole way. At one point, you all froze as a German patrol passed within 20 feet. You could see their cigarettes glowing in the dark. Hear their boots. You didn't breathe. Not once they passed, and somehow you lived the next morning. You got Burke back across the line. His foot was gone, but he was alive. He held your hand as the medics worked on him, whispering nonsense. His head lolled. Tell my mom I didn't cry. He slurred. You smiled weakly. Deal, you reported to command. The intel helped. The depot was hit by airstrike 3 days later. The brass called it a success. You didn't later. You sat alone near a broken wall. Elise's letter unfolded in your lap. You didn't read it this time, just stared at it, until the wind picked up and nearly took it. You caught it, clutched it, and finally said her name out loud. Elise. It felt like a spell or a wound. That night, Mason found you. He sat nearby, smoking. You didn't have to carry him. He said you didn't answer. I've seen guys like you, he continued. Haunted, too proud to die, too broken to live. Still, you said nothing. He looked at you, eyes sharp. But you carried him anyway. Finally turned to him. I've left too many behind already. He nodded once, then left you alone. You couldn't sleep, so you wrote. Elise carried a kid tonight, not because I'm brave, not because I'm strong, but because I needed to believe that I'm still someone who can. There's a coldness growing in me. It whispers that this war is all I'll ever be. But then I remember the sound of your voice, and I feel human again. 2 days later, you received a reply. Your name, again, written carefully, lovingly. Inside, asterisk, Michael, you are more than this war, more than the pain. I don't need you to be whole when you come back. I just need you to come back. Asterisk, you cried, holding the paper against your heart, because suddenly someone was still waiting for you. And that meant you still had a way out of hell. July 2nd, 1944. You hadn't been home in 4 years, but that morning, in a small French village called Les Rosendim, you found yourself standing in front of a house that looked exactly like the one you grew up in. Same brick, same slanted roof, same ivy trailing across the stone like veins. You froze. The war disappeared for a moment. No gunfire, no commands, no mud, just you, breathless, staring at the past made real by accident. Mason walked past without noticing, but you couldn't move, couldn't speak, could only feel. You stepped closer, your boots crunching on broken tile. The door was half open. Soot blackened the windows. A half-burned curtain fluttered like a ghost. Inside, it smelled of smoke, dust, and something sweeter like old bread. You stepped through. The floor groaned beneath your weight. A teacup lay shattered in the corner. A picture frame face down on the floor. You picked it up. The glass was cracked, but the photograph inside was untouched. A family of 4, smiling. The father wore a suit and held a little boy. The mother held the baby, wrapped in a checkered blanket. They weren't your family, but for a second, you pretended they were. You walked through the kitchen. A loaf of bread sat fossilized on the counter. 2 plates on the table. 1 fork still halfway to the edge, as if someone had dropped it mid-meal. War doesn't knock when it enters your house. It kicks the door down and takes everything. You made your way upstairs. There, in the smallest bedroom, a crib still stood. Inside was a doll face scorched, dress torn. You touched it gently. The fabric crumbled beneath your fingers, and for the first time in a long while, you thought of your parents, not their death. But their life you were born in. Illinois, but they had been born in Germany, and they had left. Because they refused to bow to monsters. Because they chose truth over safety. You remembered the night the news came. You were 16. A man in uniform showed up at the door. Your mother didn't cry. She just sat at the kitchen table and said, nothing. Your father's last letter had been burned by the government before it reached you. You were told he was a traitor. You were told your name was something to be ashamed of. So you joined the war to prove them wrong, to kill the people your parents died defying. And now here you were in a house that looked like theirs, holding the ashes of a memory, wondering what any of it meant anymore. You sat down on the ruined couch and cried, not for your fallen squad mates, not even for yourself, but for the version of you that had once believed the world was fair. You took out Elise's letter, held it tightly. Then you took out your notebook and wrote, I found our house today, except it wasn't ours, but it felt like it. I saw a crib, a photo, a half-eaten meal. War took them the same way it took you. No warning, just silence, then ash. You folded the paper and left it on the table, not to be sent, but to be remembered. Outside, Mason waited. You all right? He asked. You nodded. Just ghosts. He lit a cigarette. Plenty of those. You walked side by side toward the edge of the village. Somewhere behind you, the house stood empty again. But you had changed. You weren't just marching for revenge anymore. You were marching for memory. That night, rain fell hard. You found shelter in a barn with the rest of the squad. Someone passed around a bottle of schnapps, stolen from a German truck. You took a sip. It burned sharp and mean. Tell me something. True, Mason said suddenly. You blinked. What? Something real. Something you haven't told anyone. You thought for a moment, then said, I used to write poems. Burke, now recovering, foot wrapped in layers, chuckled. No shit? No shit, you said. Krupinski leaned back, shaking his head. Goddamn war poets, you laughed, and it didn't feel wrong. Later, once they were all asleep, you sat alone by the doorway. The rain pattered soft against the roof. You pulled out Elise's letter again and whispered, Elise, I don't know who I am anymore. Then, without meaning to, you answered yourself. You're your father's son. And for the first time, you believed it. July 5th, 1944. The wind was different that morning. Not loud, not violent, just tired like it, too, had been carrying the war for too long. You woke up early, before the others. The barn was quiet. Flies buzzed around the corners. Rain had soaked through the roof during the night, leaving puddles near the hay. Your jacket was damp. Your boots were stiff, but your mind? Clearer than it had been in days. You stepped outside, breathing deep, and looked out across the open field beyond the tree line. For the first time in a long while, there was no smoke, no shelling, just clouds and birds. You almost forgot what birds sounded like. That peace didn't last long. Mason returned from HQ with new orders. A nearby town, St. Raphael-les-Bois, had been overrun by Germans trying to regroup. The Allies needed it back. And your squad? You were going in first, scouting again. Always the first into hell. You crossed a river under cover of dusk. The bridge was half collapsed, so you had to wade through waist-high water, the current tugging at your legs, like it wanted to keep you on the far bank. You moved silently through a narrow path lined with trees. You stopped when you smelled smoke, but it wasn't the thick, oily kind from burning tanks. It was cedar wood smoke. You crouched low, listening, voices, not English, not German, French. You crept forward and found a small farmhouse. Inside, refugees, a woman, 2 children, an old man with a cane, huddled near a fire, whispering prayers. They didn't see you at first, but when they did, the mother raised her hands, shielding her kids. Soldat? She asked, trembling. You raised your rifle, then lowered it immediately. American, you said, softly. The tension broke. They let you inside. You didn't stay long, but before you left, the old man handed you something, a small cloth pouch. Inside, a medal. Poor courage, he said, smiling faintly. My son died wearing this. You take it now. You tried to refuse, he insisted. So you took it and nodded. Then you stepped back into the trees. The pouch warm in your hand, by midnight, you reached St. Raphael. The town was barely there, just rubble and quiet and the scent of wet stone. You crept into a house near the edge, what used to be a bakery. There were still rolls on the counter, hard as bricks, but then something moved upstairs. You froze, listened, footsteps. You signaled to Mason. He nodded, flanked the stairs. You kicked the door open. A German soldier stood at the window, young, unarmed, hands shaking. He didn't raise them. He didn't reach for anything. He just looked at you, terrified and human. Bit? He whispered, please. You kept your rifle aimed. Mason shouted from behind you, take him out. But you didn't. You couldn't. Your finger froze on the trigger. He looked just like the boy from the orchard. He looked like you. And suddenly, it hit you like a fist in your chest. This wasn't about sides anymore. This was about surviving something none of you had asked for. You lowered the rifle, Mason cursed. You're soft, he spat, but he didn't stop you. You took the boy outside, tied his hands, left him with HQ 2 days later, and never found out what happened to him. Back at camp, the others argued about what you'd done. Some said you were a fool. Some said you'd lost your edge. But Burke came to your defense. He made a choice, he said, to see a person instead of a target. You didn't speak up. You just sat alone, watching the sky shift from gray to red as the sun dipped behind the horizon. You opened Elise's letter again and added a new page. I spared someone today, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. I saw my reflection in his eyes, and I couldn't pull the trigger on myself. You folded the letter, tucked it under your shirt, and let the night wrap around you like a cold, familiar coat. The next morning, Mason didn't speak to you, not once, but Krupinski handed you a ration bar and said, you're still here, that counts. You nodded and chewed, and wondered if survival was the only thing left that mattered. Later that day, Burke showed you a photograph. He'd kept it hidden until now. A girl, black hair, big teeth, laughing. My sister, he said. I used to tease her for snorting when she laughed. Miss that sound. You smiled, then showed him Elise's letter. He read it carefully, handed it back. She writes like she loves. You, he said. She does, you said. Then maybe there's still hope, he muttered. You didn't answer, but you held on to the thought. Like a lifeline. That night, there was no gunfire, no movement, just the wind, soft, gentle, carrying ashes from some distant battle across the trees. You lay on your back, staring up at the stars, and for once, you didn't feel alone. You felt small, and real and alive, even if just for one more night. July 9th, 1944, the days were starting to blur again. You marched more than you spoke, ate whatever you could heat with a match, slept with your boots on. The war had stripped everything away, your routine, your softness, your belief in fairness. What was left was instinct, reaction, the next breath. You were sent east this time. Forest country, endless trees with no names. Just rustling canopies and ground soaked with the blood of battles no one bothered to record. You didn't ask questions anymore. You just went. Your squad was tasked with intercepting a convoy German supply trucks moving through the woods under. Heavy guard, take out the lead vehicle, scatter the rest. Simple on paper, but nothing was simple anymore. You waited in the brush for hours. Mason whispered the plan. Burke clutched his rifle like a prayer. Krupinski lit a match and burned the edge of a cigarette down to the filter. And you? You kept thinking about Elise's last letter. If you ever feel like you're disappearing, write, I'll remember for both of us. You pulled your dog tags from under your shirt, pressed them against your lips, and the trucks appeared, 5 of them, big, rumbling, soldiers on foot flanking the convoy. Scanning the trees, you moved with them. Shadows in the forest. You waited until they reached the bend. Then Karpinski threw the grenade. Boom. The first truck flipped, fire blooming from. It's hooed like a flower. Mason screamed, "Move!" Everything went chaotic. Gunfire erupted in every direction. Smoke filled your lungs. Trees shattered. Bark exploded. You ducked behind a log, firing into silhouettes. One dropped. Another screamed. Someone yelled in German. A boy, maybe 16, tried to run and caught a bullet in the spine. You didn't have time to feel it. You just kept moving. Somewhere in the noise, you lost sight of Burke. You shouted for him twice. No answer. Then you heard it. Not a gunshot. A scream. You found him behind. A stump. Pinned by debris. Blood pouring from his leg. His face was pale. Hands clawing at the earth like he could tunnel away. Don't let them take me. He gasped. They won't, you said. You fired twice at a soldier approaching, dropping him, then pulled Burke free. His leg was mangled, bone visible, the stump a mess of meat. Mason ran over. We need to go. Air support's coming. You couldn't carry Burke. Not this time. But you weren't leaving him. He knew it. And that's when he did something you never expected. He pulled something from his pocket. A cigarette. Lit it with shaking hands. Took a drag, then handed it to you. You took it, and he smiled. Not bad, he whispered. Better than Minnesota. You laughed, even as your throat closed, even as tears burned your eyes. He closed his own, didn't open them again. You buried him under a pine tree, used his helmet to mark the grave. You didn't say a prayer. You didn't have one left in you, but you left the cigarette butt on top of the dirt. A memory, a marker, proof that he'd existed. Later, back at camp, Karpinski sat beside you, arms coated in blood that wasn't his. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he said, I used to hate you. You didn't react. He continued, thought you were soft, too poetic, too clean. He paused. But you carried him. Even when it meant dying, you looked at him, and for the first time, saw something human in his face. He pulled out a flask, offered it to you. You drank, didn't ask what was in it, didn't care. That night, you wrote, Elysée lost another brother. Today, he wasn't mine by blood, but in this war, you become brothers fast. You either die together, or not at all. I keep thinking about his last words. He said, Minnesota, a place he'll never see again. I hope you're warm tonight. I hope the world is still beautiful somewhere. Because here, it's just smoke, and brothers turning into ashes. The next morning, you found Karpinski standing at Burke's grave. He didn't say anything, just placed a pack of cigarettes beside the helmet, and walked away. You stayed a moment longer, then whispered, see you in the smoke, brother, and marched on, July 12th. 1944. It had been raining for 3 days straight, the kind of rain that didn't wash anything clean, just made the mud thicker, the stench stronger, the misery heavier. Everywhere you went, you sunk an inch deeper into the earth. Your socks were never dry, your rifle always damp, your hands cracked until they bled. Mason had stopped talking altogether, just nodded, pointed, and moved like a ghost through the downpour. Karpinski had grown quieter too, less rage, more staring. At nothing for long stretches. Sometimes he muttered names in his sleep. You stopped asking who they were. Everyone was carrying ghosts now. You were positioned near a rural intersection, nothing more than 2 dirt roads splitting between flooded fields and broken fences. Command said the Germans were moving a communications vehicle through the area. Your squad was to intercept it. No mistakes, no mercy. It sounded simple, but nothing was any more. You waited in a barn on the northern road, watching the horizon, The rain never stopped. Even when the vehicle came into view, gray, steel, humming like a giant insect, it kept falling in sheets, blurring your view, hiding movement in the brush. Mason gave the signal. You stepped out. The first grenade took out the escort. The second hit the tire. The third, a misfire, sent shrapnel into Krupinski's leg. He went down, howling, blood pouring through his pants. You reached for him, but Mason shouted, "Stay on the truck." You turned. Two German soldiers burst from the side doors, one with a pistol, the other unarmed. You shot the first before he could fire. The second froze. Hands up, young, 18. Maybe. His uniform hung loose. His boots didn't match. He said something. In German, voice shaking, then in halting English, "Please, I am not soldier. I fix radios." You hesitated. Mason didn't. He walked up behind you and shot the boy in the head. No expression, no pause, just blood and brain on the wet road. You stared, frozen, your stomach turned. Krupinski groaned from the mud behind you. Mason just reloaded and walked back toward the barn. That night, you confronted him. Why did you do that? You asked. He didn't look at you, just sat on a crate, cleaning his pistol. He was surrendering. You said, "No," Mason replied. He was surviving. What's the difference? Mason's hand stopped. He looked at you with tired, dead eyes. If you start thinking like that, you won't make it through the next week. You left him there. You didn't want to hear anything else. You were afraid he might be right, Krupinski. Survived, but barely. They sent a jeep for him the next morning. Before he left, he looked at you and said, "You should have been the one giving orders." You didn't know what to say, so you just clasped his hand, then watched him vanish into the fog, alone again, except Mason and the weight of that boy's eyes, still looking at you in your dreams, still whispering something you couldn't understand. You wrote Elise that night, but not to tell her what happened. LSA stood at a crossroads today. One road was duty, one was decency. I chose the wrong one. Or maybe I didn't choose at all. Maybe that's the worst part. You didn't sleep, you just stared into the dark and listened to the rain hit the roof, a rhythm like a heartbeat. Fading. The next morning, you found a letter in your pack. Hadn't noticed it before. Folded small, Elise. Your hands trembled as you opened it. Asterisk. Michael, I don't care what you've done. I care that you still feel it. That you still ask if it was right. That tells me who you are. Come back to me, even if it's just what's left of you. Asterisk. You folded the letter slowly, pressed it to your heart, and cried for the boy, for Krupinski, for the line you crossed and couldn't uncross. Later that day, Mason told you you'd be moving out. New orders, new war. But something inside you had changed. You didn't follow him as quickly as before. You walked slower, deliberate, like a man carrying something heavy and sacred. A name, a choice, a shadow that would never quite let you go. July 16th, 1944. The air was still. Not quiet, it was never true. Silence anymore, but still, like the world was holding its breath, like it knew something was coming. You walked with Mason down a ruined road toward what used to be a village Beaulieu. Now, it was just rubble and weeds. A church tower with half its face blown off leaned sideways, like it was ashamed to watch the war. No civilians, no animals, just the hollow bones of homes and the black soot of memory burned into walls. You were sent to retrieve what remained of. A downed American recon plane. A scout had spotted the wreckage days earlier, just past the edge of the village. In a wheat field turned to ash, no survivors expected, but command wanted the camera. And the letters, always the letters, not because they cared, but because it looked good on paper. A plane had crashed nose first into the earth. One wing stuck, up like a broken arm. The bodies were still strapped into the cockpit, faces gone, names unreadable. Mason helped you pry open the back panel. Inside, bags of mail, Hundreds of envelopes, charred at the corners, some melted together by flame. You didn't speak as you lifted the satchel onto your shoulder. Didn't speak as you passed the pilot's corpse, still clutching the yoke like he'd tried to pull the sky back toward him. Back at the command post, Mason dropped the bag without a word and walked off. But you couldn't. Not yet. You sat beneath a tree, opened the bag, and pulled out one letter, then another, and another. You read them. One by one, names that meant nothing to you, but words that meant everything to someone. Once, dear Mama, the stars are the same here as they were in Kentucky. Annie, if you're reading this, I'm still alive. To my baby girl, keep coloring the sky blue like I taught you. You couldn't stop. You read until your eyes burned, until the ink blurred from tears, until it felt like every voice you'd ever lost was speaking through those pages. Louis, Javier, Burke, even the German boy Mason had killed, they were all in the owl. Letters all trying to come home. You found one envelope addressed to Private Michael Keller. Your name. But it wasn't Elisa's handwriting. It was from the War Department. Your hands went cold. You opened it. Inside. Asterisk to Private Keller. We regret to inform you that a soldier you served with Private First Class Rayleigh Thomas was declared Kia as of June 9th, 1944. Official time of death. Unknown. Personal effects. Unrecovered. You are listed as his emergency contact. We extend our sympathies. Asterisk, you stared at the letter. Knew it already. Felt it when it happened. But seeing it on paper made it real in a new way. Final sealed, you pulled out your notebook and wrote, Riley, they finally told me. Like I didn't already feel the second your laughter disappeared from. The world, like I needed a goddamn envelope to understand that you weren't coming back. I'm sorry I couldn't save you. I'm sorry we said goodbye without knowing it. I'm sorry it was me, and not you left behind. You didn't cry this time. You just felt empty, like the grief had hollowed you out and made space for something colder, something permanent. That night, Mason sat across from you at the fire. Neither of you spoke for a long time. Then he pulled out a letter from his own coat pocket, held it in the firelight, didn't open it, just stared at it like it hurt to look at. Wife? You asked. He shook his head. No, sister. You waited. He didn't say anything more, but he didn't have to. You understood now that every man out here was dragging a ghost behind him, some heavier than others. In the dark, you found one last letter buried deep in the bag. A child's drawing, crayon on a folded page. A stick-figure soldier next to a house with a dog. At the bottom, written in lopsided block letters, Come home soon, Daddy. You held it in your lap, hands trembling, and for the first time in weeks, you prayed, not for safety, not for peace, but for whoever never got to read that note. Later, you wrote to Elise, Today I read letters written by men who are no longer breathing. Words outlived them, memories floating in ash. There was a picture drawn by a child, and it broke something in me I didn't even know was still whole. I don't know if I'll come back with anything left of who I was, but I'll come back with every letter I can carry. You folded that final letter and placed it gently into your pack, not because it belonged to you, but because it belonged to someone, and that was enough. July 20th, 1944. The woods were thick that day, not just with trees, but with fog. A white curtain hung between the branches, muffling sound, muting color. The world felt like it had been dipped in silence. You and Mason were patrolling the eastern ridge near the Moselle River. Rumors said the Germans were regrouping somewhere in the area. Your job was to find them before they found you. It felt routine until it wasn't. You heard the voice before you saw the man. Soft, measured. Don't shoot. Not in German. In English. You froze. The voice came again, just ahead. I'm alone. I'm unarmed. You raised your rifle, slowly pushing through the brush until you Saw him, a German soldier, but older than most, mid-30s. Maybe his uniform was weathered. His helmet gone, hands raised, palms open. He didn't look afraid. He looked tired, just like you. Mason moved beside you, rifle aimed at the man's head. The German nodded toward you. You're American? You said nothing. He nodded again. Figures. Mason took a step forward. You speak English? The man smirked. Better than you do. That almost made you laugh, almost. You searched him. No weapon, just a satchel. Inside 3 apples, a pen, and a torn copy of the Count of Monte Cristo in German and English. Bilingual, educated. A translator, maybe. Mason didn't care. He was ready to tie him up, drag him back to camp, but the man said something that stopped you both cold. My name is Heinrich Keller. You blinked. Keller? He nodded. My grandfather came from Pennsylvania. You felt the air shift. He said your last name, your blood, your language. He saw your hesitation and smiled. We might be cousins. Back at camp, Mason argued to hand him over. You argued for time. Heinrich sat quietly through it all, legs crossed, gaze calm, like he had already accepted whatever fate awaited him. That night, you brought him water. He thanked you, and then said something you'll never forget. My parents were arrested in Munich, 1939, for hiding Jews. You stared, he went on. I joined the Wehrmacht to survive, not to kill. I've never pulled the trigger. You wanted to call him a liar, but his voice, it wasn't begging. It was confession, like he needed someone. Anyone to understand. You sat beside him as the fire crackled low. Why tell me all this? You asked, he shrugged. You looked like someone who's already lost too much to keep lying to himself. That cut deeper than it should have. He took something from his pocket, a photograph. Creased, worn, his wife, his daughter. Her name is Anna, he said. She's 6. She sings when it rains. You showed him Elise's letter. He read it, said nothing, just nodded, then handed it back like it was holy. The next morning, the orders came. Heinrich was to be turned over to intelligence, interrogated, possibly shot. Mason said nothing. You packed Heinrich's satchel yourself, slipped Elise's letter inside it. He looked surprised. You trust me? You said nothing, just handed him an apple from your own rations, then watched him be taken away. That night, you couldn't sleep. You lay in your cot, staring at the canvas above, remembering Heinrich's voice, his calm, his humanity, his daughter's name. You wrote Elise. Today I met the enemy. He spoke my language. He shared my name. He reminded me of my father. I wanted to hate him. I tried, but all I saw was a man trying to survive a war he didn't choose. Just like me. You paused, then added, we think we're so different, but when the bombs fall, we all flinch the same way. The next day, command asked for your statement. You said nothing incriminating, you didn't lie, you just edited. Heinrich Keller was last seen being transferred east. You never found out what happened to him, but you liked to imagine he survived, made it back to Anna, maybe read the Count of Monte Cristo to her under safer skies, maybe even told her about the American soldier with the same name who gave him an apple in the woods. July 24th, 1944. They called it the Road of Bones. Not officially, not on any map. But that's what the men called it. A thin, winding path carved through a forest near Avranches. Supposed to be a supply route. Supposed to be safe. But the trees whispered different stories. Convoys vanished on that road. Scouts never came back. And now you are being sent down it. You traveled light. Just Mason. A new recruit named Wells. And yourself. 3 rifles, 1 radio, enough food for a day and a half. The rain had finally stopped, but the mud hadn't dried. It stuck to your boots like regret. Heavy, relentless. Wells was green, barely 19. Freckles across his nose, kept. Humming to himself to stay calm. You didn't bother learning much more about him. You'd stopped memorizing names when it hurt too much to remember them later. The forest was deathly quiet. No birds, no wind, just the creak of branches, the squelch of mud, and Wells humming off key, nervous. And somehow the only thing keeping the world from collapsing in. You walked for hours. Nothing. Then came the smell, burnt rubber, fuel, flesh. You reached the first truck at a bend in the road. It was flipped on its side, riddled with holes. The driver's body was still inside, blackened, half melted into the seat. Flies buzzed like a funeral choir. Wells vomited into the bushes. You barely blinked. Mason moved up the trail. You smell that? He asked. Ambush, you said. Recent? Trap? Probably, he nodded. Let's keep moving. Wells wiped his mouth. Shouldn't we go back? Mason looked at him like he'd never seen a child in uniform before. No going back, he said, and that was the truth. Further up, you found the bones scattered across the trail. Not buried, not arranged, just there. Skulls, ribs, a child's shoe. Wells whispered. Jesus, Mason said. Keep moving. But you stopped. Knelt. There, between the roots of a tree, half buried in mud, was a dog tag. American. You wiped it clean, read the name. Didn't recognize. It didn't matter. You put it in your pocket. Another ghost to carry. Then the first shot rang out. Crack, then the snap of a bullet slicing air. You dove. Wells screamed. Mason shouted, Left! Tree line. You rolled behind a fallen log, heart pounding, eyes scanning. There, 2 Germans. Dug into a camouflaged foxhole. You returned fire. Mason flanked left. Wells froze. You screamed at him. Move! He didn't. The second shot hit him in the neck. He dropped. Just like that. The humming stopped. You went blind with fury. Emptied half your clip into the foxhole. Mason lobbed a grenade. Silence followed. Then the wind returned like even nature had been holding its breath. You ran to Wells. Held him. Blood poured from his mouth. He looked at you. Didn't speak, just reached up and pressed something into your hand. A harmonica. Then he was gone. You buried him near the truck. Used his helmet as a marker. Didn't say a word. Just sat beside the grave until the sun started to set. Mason didn't speak for hours. Then finally, he said, he shouldn't have been here. No one should? You replied. He nodded. And that was the closest you'd ever come to agreeing on anything. That night, back at camp, you cleaned the harmonica, held it in your hand, thought about Wells humming, the way he stared too long at the sky, the way he still believed in something, anything, when the rest of you had forgotten how. You brought it to your lips, blew one note, it cracked, croaked, but it was something, a sound, a presence, a pulse in the dark. You wrote to Elise. Elise today. The road swallowed another boy. I didn't know him well. He hummed when he was scared. That's all I can remember. That and the harmonica. He handed it to me as he died. I wonder if he ever learned to play. I wonder if it matters. Maybe this is all that's left of us notes. In the dark, echoes between trees and roads paved in bones. You didn't sleep that night. Just sat by the fire, holding that harmonica, blowing into it once in a while, not for music, but to prove you were still breathing, still here, still capable of noise in a world drowning in silence. July 28th, 1944. The sky had changed. It was no longer blue, no longer gray. It was fire. Blazing orange clouds streaked with black, smoke rising in columns from the northeast, somewhere beyond. The trees, an entire village, had gone up like a matchstick. You'd seen towns burn before, but not like this. Not from this far. Not this fast. You stood on a ridge with Mason, and a few new replacements kids again. Always kids, watching as the sun dipped behind the inferno. It's Montreal, someone muttered, but they didn't need to say it. You already knew, because Elise's last letter had mentioned it. Her aunt had moved there to escape the city. You felt your knees lock. your throat close. It wasn't just fire in the sky. It was your fear made real. You asked for permission to go down there alone. Command said no, Mason didn't. You go, he said, but don't take too long coming back. You ran most of the way. Through the woods, past a broken fence line, down a dirt path littered with burned-out vehicles and abandoned helmets. The smoke stung your eyes. The wind carried the sound of distant screams. You pressed forward. Montreal was gone. Not damaged. Gone. House after house reduced to rubble. The church steeple collapsed. A horse burned. Motionless lay in the road with its reins still attached to a cart that had no wheels left. You moved through the ash like a ghost, calling names, listening, nothing. You reached the square. There were bodies, dozens of them, civilians stacked, shot. Some burned alive. You dropped to your knees, your hands shaking, then you heard it, a cough. You followed the sound behind what was once a bakery. There, huddled beneath a wooden door, was a little girl, covered in soot. Eyes wide, silent, you approached slowly. "It's okay," you said, voice cracking. "I'm not the bad kind." She didn't answer, just clutched a stuffed rabbit to her chest, its ears half burned away. You wrapped her in your coat. She didn't resist, didn't cry. She had no tears left. You searched the rubble for hours after. Found no one else alive, but you did find Elise's letter, the one she'd written last, charred around the edges, but intact, asterisk. "Michael, they say, Montreal is safe. I hope that's true. I don't trust the silence anymore, but I trust you. Always, asterisk." You held it close to your chest, then turned back toward camp. The girl in your arms, the sky behind you still on fire. The others stared as you returned. Mason didn't ask questions, just nodded once and lit a cigarette. The girl never spoke. Not that night, not the next day. You gave her some bread, a blanket. She slept curled next to your pack, like it was a wall between her and the world. You sat nearby and watched the flames on the horizon finally die down. That night, you wrote, "Elise, think your aunt is gone? Couldn't find her, but I found a child who survived. She hasn't said a word, but she's here. And that's something. The fire didn't take everything. Just almost." You paused, then added, "If I don't come home, tell someone I tried to save." What little light was left. Mason sat next to you as you finished. He looked at the girl, then at you. "You planning to keep her?" You nodded. "Until I can find someone better," he grunted, and for the first time, smiled, just a little. "She's safer with you than any priest or colonel." You didn't respond, just leaned back against the sandbags and watched the sky. No longer fire, now just stars, cold, bright, distant, and still somehow enough. August 3rd, 1944. The war had moved on, but you hadn't, not really. Your body followed orders, marched, ate, slept, protected the little girl you rescued, Claire. You learned. Her name was, but your soul? It stayed behind in the ash, still listening for voices that were never coming back. She rarely spoke, only a word or two each day. Mostly she clung to your side, quiet as snowfall, her stuffed rabbit always in her grip. The men called her Ghost, but you called her Hope because you needed to. That morning, Mason handed you a letter from Elisa. Your heart skipped. But when you opened it, something was wrong. The paper wasn't her usual stationery. The handwriting wasn't hers. It was her sister's. Asterisk, Michael, I don't know how to say this. Elise is gone. She was killed during a bombing raid 2 weeks ago. She never made it out of the building. I found your letters in her drawer, all of them. I think you should have them back. Asterisk, you didn't finish the letter. You couldn't. Your vision blurred. The world tilted. You dropped to your knees in the mud and let the letter slip from your fingers. The silence was unbearable, like the world itself had held its breath out of respect. Later, Claire placed her small hand in yours. said just one word. Sorry. That broke you. You cried harder than you ever had. Harder than when your parents died. Harder. And when Riley fell, harder than Burke's grave or Wells' last breath. Because this was different. This was home. Gone. That night, you didn't write. You couldn't. You sat alone by the fire while the others drifted off, staring at the blank page in your notebook. The pen in your hand felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, but eventually, you found the words. Elise, no, you can't read this, but I have to write it anyway, because writing to you is the only thing that's kept me alive. You are my compass in this storm, my shelter, my reason to come back. I used to think I was. Writing letters to the future. Turns out I was writing eulogies for the version of me that believed in happy endings. You folded the letter, put it with the rest, tied them together with twine, and tucked them deep into your pack, a small grave of ink and memory. The next day, Mason said you had new orders, final push. An assault on a German communications hub dug into the hillside at St. Etienne. He didn't need to say it, but you knew. This was going to be bad. Maybe the end. You looked at Claire, still holding her rabbit, still trusting you. You knelt down, held, her cheeks in your hands. I need you to stay here, you whispered. No matter what, Mason will look after you. She nodded. No tears, no fear, just trust. The kind that shatters you when you don't deserve it. Before you left, she gave you something, a drawing, crayon lines on dirty paper, a stick figure holding hands with a smaller one, and a sun still shining. You kept that drawing in your pocket as you marched into St. Etienne. Gunfire in the distance, smoke rising, the world once again collapsing into violence, but your steps were steady, your heart broken but full, not of revenge, not anymore, but of something deeper, duty, memory, love that outlived the ones who gave it. You reached the ridge with Mason and the squad, waited for the signal, and as the sun began to rise, you wrote one last line in your notebook. This might be the last letter I ever write, and if it is, tell the world I didn't die angry. I died remembering love, August 10th, 1944, St. Etienne. The ground shook as the first shells landed. Dirt exploded into the sky. Screams cut through the trees. Somewhere ahead, a machine gun opened up chopping. The morning into bloody ribbons. You didn't flinch. Not this time. You had nothing left to lose. Nothing but the child who waited for you behind the lines. And the ghost of a girl who used to write you letters. You and Mason moved through the chaos. Like smoke low, fast, invisible. Bullets snapped over your heads. Men fell. You didn't look back. The plan was simple. Flank the enemy, breach the bunker, disable the comms, but no plan survives the front line. At the base of the hill, a mortar hit too close. You were thrown against a tree, ears ringing. When your vision cleared, Mason was dragging you behind a broken wall. You good? He yelled. You nodded, even though you couldn't hear him, even though your right leg burned like fire. There was no time. You pushed forward anyway. One last run. The hill was smoke and metal. You saw men drop like dominoes. One caught fire. Another crawled without legs. The screaming never stopped. You kept going, not because you were brave, but because you'd already made peace with dying. You reached the bunker with Mason, planted the charges, blew the door. What happened next was a blur of blood, steel, and instinct. Mason cleared the first. 2 rooms you followed, heart pounding. Rifle shaking, then gunfire. He went down. You screamed his name. He looked up at you, blood pouring from his side. And for the first time in all the hell you'd shared, he smiled. Guess I finally caught one, he whispered. You dropped beside him, held his hand, asterisk, asterisk. Stay with me? He shook his head. I'm tired, Keller. You gritted your teeth. I need you. No, you don't, he said. You've got someone to go back to. Then he looked at you with those sharp, tired eyes and said, "Tell her I wasn't always an asshole." Then he died. Just like that, you finished the mission alone, disabled the coms, held the line until reinforcements arrived. They found you sitting on the floor, bloodied, shaking, holding Mason's tags like a prayer. You didn't speak for hours, not until someone asked your name, and you said, "Private Michael Keller, United States Army, born of exiles, made by war." The fighting didn't end that day, but something else did. Something inside you, something cold, something that had kept you from crying for a long time. Now the tears came weeks later, the war rolled forward. You didn't follow. They pulled you back. Shell shock, they said. Battle fatigue, you barely noticed. All you cared about was getting back to Claire. When you returned to the camp, she was waiting, still holding her rabbit, still believing in you. She ran to you. You knelt and caught her in your arms. And for the first time since Elise died, you felt alive. Not whole, but alive. You didn't go home right away. You stayed behind, helping relocate. Children, lost ones, broken ones, you wrote fewer letters. But one day, sitting by a riverside, you wrote one more. Not to Elise, not to command, to the world. "Dear world, I fought your war. I lost my friends. I lost my love. I lost pieces of myself. I'll never get back, but I saved one girl. And maybe, just maybe, that makes it worth something. When your guns go silent, listen, you might hear us still breathing." You signed it with your name, folded it, left it under a stone by the river, a message in a bottle, for anyone who might still be listening years later. You'd return to that river, Claire older now, laughing, the sun warm, the sky no longer burning, and you'd remember every name, every face, every letter, and thank them quietly for teaching you how to live again.